Coral Castle is a stone structure built by Latvian-American Edward Leedskalnin in the mid-1900s in Homestead, Florida. It consists of several large stones carved from limestone which was formed from coral. There is a lot of speculation as to how exactly Leedskalnin built this structure. This is partly because Leedskalnin himself was pretty vague when he was asked how he did it. This has led a lot of people to believe that Edward Leedskalnin knew some kind of ancient secret of how to levitate rocks or something similar. There are several points of interest regarding Coral Castle that I will discuss in this video. Number 1. How did Edward Leedskalnin lift, move, and carve such heavy stones? Number 2. What's the deal with this mysterious black box seen in pictures? Number 3. What was the odd-looking circular object that many speculate was a power source for Coral Castle? Number 4. How did he make a large stone door move with the slightest touch? Number 5. What were the numbers inscribed on this stone? And number 6. Why was he so vague about his technique? Let's start with the question, how did Leedskalnin lift the stones? Well, believe it or not, there are actually pictures and even a very recently found little-known short film showing him using a heavy lifting tripod or teepee lift with a block and tackle hand chain hoist to lift the stones. The tripod and hoist method using large logs was a very common method of lifting heavy objects at the time that Leedskalnin built Coral Castle. In fact, this method is still in use today. These days, lifting tripods are still made with logs, but the commercial ones are made with steel or aluminum. The hoists that Leedskalnin is shown using are really typical hand chain hoists, sometimes called a block and tackle or chain fall, and some of the hoists are still in the tool shed at Coral Castle. A chain hoist is operated by hand. An operator will easily pull down on one side of the chain loop. This chain loop is smaller than the actual lifting chain, which is in the middle of the hoist, since the hand chain doesn't actually have to do any lifting. It's only attached to a wheel, which connects to the gear housing. This will turn a pulley mechanism inside the chain hoist housing. When this pulley turns, it will lift up the end of the other, much larger chain, which usually has a hook on the end. I actually used to work at a shop that sold and repaired and even load-tested chain hoists, and just by looking at the hoist in these pictures, it has a very large capacity, probably 10 to 30 tons. You can tell by the size of the hook, the large gauge of the chain, and also by the fact that the chain block is tripled at the bottom. This is a method only found in large capacity chain hoists. The pulley at the bottom of the hoist doubles the capacity of the hoist for every chain. In this case, there are 3. It should also be noted that in the pictures of Ed using the tripod, you can see that he's actually using 2 hoists, which would again double the capacity he was able to lift. In the video, you can actually see Ed lifting a 15-ton stone with only 1 hoist. The largest stone at Coral Castle was about 30 tons. Even if we assume that the hoist he was using in the video was only 15 tons, he could have simply added another hoist, as seen in the still pictures, to lift the 30-ton stone. It should be noted, however, that the largest stones at Coral Castle are sitting on the ground and probably didn't need to be lifted off the ground, but rather just stood up on their ends, which means that the full 30-ton capacity wouldn't even be needed. This also explains the box at the top of the tripod, which much has been made about. This box served 2 purposes. It helped to secure the 3 beams of the tripod, and it also contained the shackle with which to attach the chain hoist. With modern metal tripod gantries, the same purpose is achieved by welding a metal plate to the top of the beams as seen in the picture below. How did Leedskalnin move the stones from the quarry to the site? Here again, we're helped by this amazing new video recently uncovered. In this short film, it shows Leedskalnin using a technique that is used by many machinery movers today. He's using a chain, ratchet, and a system of rollers. This method could easily move even the largest stone at Coral Castle with minimal effort. This is because the capacity of the ratchet pulling the stone only needs to be a fraction of the total weight of the object that it's pulling. How did Edward Leedskalnin carve the stones? The stones that were used to build Coral Castle were made out of a type of limestone formed by coral. This stone was quarried on site, so he never had to move the stones very far. The stone is actually relatively easy to quarry since the particular type of stone was very brittle and therefore easy to chip away from the bedrock. According to James Miller, a tour guide at Coral Castle, after removing the stone from the quarry, it was carved using a chain with teeth, much like a chainsaw blade. The quarrying and carving of the stone is not usually disputed since there's nothing very mysterious about it other than the fact that it would take a great deal of patience. But considering that Leedskalnin worked on the site more or less continually for over 28 years, we can see that, if nothing else, Leedskalnin was a patient man. What was the odd-looking circular object that many people speculate was the power source for Coral Castle? This is actually an AC generator, which worked by attaching copper wire, which has since been removed, to magnets on a flywheel. This is the same basic system used for a modern hand crank powered radio. Leedskalnin was interested in electromagnetism and built this device as a kind of demonstration. According to a Coral Castle tour guide, Ed would spin the flywheel manually, which would then light up 2 light bulbs. This was all that it powered. There was nowhere to store the electricity, so the light bulbs would go out as soon as Ed stopped the crank. Many people mistakenly believe that this somehow powered the whole site of Coral Castle, but it was essentially just a showpiece that he used when giving tours of the site. And this generator wouldn't have had the ability to power much of anything even if it was constantly cranked. How did he make a large stone door move with the slightest touch? The entrance to Coral Castle was a large stone door that would spin with even the slightest touch. Up until recently, when the hinges broke, people were unaware of how he achieved this. Since then, however, they've discovered that an iron rod and an old truck bearing was placed in a hole drilled at the bottom of the rock. This could be done by making sure that the hole was drilled at the rock's center of gravity. Once you find the rock's center of gravity, it's easy to move. Notice how this man easily moves stones up to 25 tons. In fact, he's even moved an entire barn by himself. It's all about finding the center of gravity. What were the numbers inscribed on the door jamb on the second floor of Coral Castle? There are 2 sets of numbers inscribed on a door at Coral Castle, and many have speculated that these numbers were a clue as to how Leedskalnin moved or lifted the stones. But they are actually his immigration registration number and his citizenship number. You can actually prove this because Leedskalnin's immigration papers still exist. It was common for immigrants in those days to post or carve these numbers on a door for the authorities. Finally, why was Leedskalnin so vague about his technique? Edward Leedskalnin often built Coral Castle at night, and he evaded questions about how exactly he built it. He gave cryptic answers to people that asked him, like, "It's not difficult if you know." It seems that he wanted people to think it was more mysterious than it was. I speculate that at least in part, this was just good marketing. After all, he did make his living giving tours of Coral Castle, and it would just make sense to keep people guessing as to his methods. Having said that, I want to make it clear that I think that Edward Leedskalnin was obviously a genius, although I don't think he knew anything about anti-gravity. If you'd like to see more debunkings of similar theories, watch my 3-hour-long film called Ancient Aliens Debunked in the notes. Thanks for your time.